one of the strategies I like to give children who are PDA is a tomorrow box. So we can leave something to do tomorrow, because all of us leave stuff for tomorrow, and it just gives them out. It's like they're not saying they're not going to do it, just we'll look at that tomorrow. And I find that just gives children a really powerful choice about, I let them choose what order they're going to do things. And if they don't want to do it today, not a problem, tomorrow box. But you'd be amazed how many people would think, as a teacher, I should be making children. So we have the same struggles.
I love that as well. And I think that's so important, always having that way out and feeling that, because again, when that child has that, when they're very, very stressed and have a kind of very small capacity for dealing with things, that is part of that building blocks for them knowing, okay, well, that's fine. We have that flexibility to move that to another day. That will immediately reduce that anxiety down immediately.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Sue Larkey podcast. As I always say, you have to embrace difference to make a difference. Let's dive into today's podcast. Welcome everybody. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Eliza Fricker here, who is an illustrator, author, and most importantly, a mother of a PDA child. I'm super excited to have Eliza on the podcast to share with her experiences and knowledges in all sorts of areas. So welcome, Eliza.
Thanks for having me.
So can you just give us broad, what's your experience of PDA for people who might know anything about it or new?
Yeah, I think for most of us who are parents of children with a demand avoidant profile, I think we come to it quite late. That was certainly my experience, that you're kind of going through, you're going to meetings, you're going to coffee mornings, all of them are sort of around having an autistic child, and none of it is quite resonating or chiming. So some of it is, but there's a lot of it where you're thinking, this doesn't really fit, or I don't think that would work for my child. So there's a kind of, that's quite isolating in itself, because you're going to these meetings which are there to kind of support you and make you feel part of a community with other parents, but you're partly thinking, well, this isn't going to fit, or this isn't my child. So I think that's how we all start off. And then we find out about PDA. And then we get that light bulb moment, and that's when we can start to that's when we furiously start to research and probably rip up the parenting book somewhere along the way when we find that out and start to do things quite differently. And that's when we see the change. And usually that change comes around that time when things become quite difficult. I would imagine most parents I speak to, you kind of get to this point where it's sort of unsustainable for anyone. You know, parents are miserable and the child's miserable. So something's got to give and something's got to change. And then hopefully it gets a bit easier and a bit more positive. But yeah, I think most of us come to this quite late, after quite a long time of struggling, really.
Yeah. What age was your daughter when she got the PDA added?
We never went down the official diagnosis route because it's not in the DSM-5. I didn't really want to go down that route anyway. I felt there was it was enough for us to have that diagnosis of autism, and it didn't seem necessary for us. And it's something I talk to a lot of families about. You know, it's more money. You know, have you got another couple of £1,000 to spend on that diagnosis, or can you do this stuff just with the knowledge that you do have now? You know that it's PDA.
Absolutely. And I think that's the case for many families. But I really like the way you're saying that you had the autism diagnosis, but none of that was really hitting, like only bits of it were hitting. What sort of things, once you've started reading about PDA, sort of jumped out at you that you went, that's my daughter? Were there moments like that for you?
I think, to be honest, I think a lot of it was when you were given things like, you know, a whiteboard or planning. There was a lot of things around planning. You just need to kind of plan more, and then things will become easier. And I was thinking, God, you know, planning in our house, absolutely not, you know. And I think that's the thing. It's really difficult with professionals and parents. And this is what, you know, so much of my work is about, is getting everyone on board and on the same page to work collaboratively. We talk about this collaboratively with our own children, but we need to work collaboratively the adults involved, because often what happens is professionals, well-meaning, is sort of making these suggestions, and families are like, absolutely no, this stuff is not going to work. So you immediately are in this strange sort of quite kind of stressful dynamic, because you've got professionals saying, well, why are you not going to try this? How do you know it's not going to work? And we kind of instinctively as parents know that's not going to work, and often we know that will probably end in another meltdown. And then obviously the professionals will think, well, that's probably because they're not kind of putting those boundaries in, they're being too laid back or inconsistent with those children. And, if they put more in, so professionals are kind of going, ramp it up more. And the families with a PDA kid are going, no, we need to pull back more. So, it's a very tricky dynamic. But certainly for me, it was that stuff where I just knew instinctively a lot of it, it's not going to work.
Yeah. So, for example, when you're saying like a whiteboard, do you mean like being told to follow a schedule or routine, and your daughter would push back against that? So what works then? What
Absolutely.
works for her?
Yeah, so I think that's really important. So I think what I changed that to is, rather than having planned kind of routines, what I talk about is consistency. So what we need with that actually is we need consistency in us. So in how we approach every situation. So we don't become dysregulated. We have to be really even and really calm for our children, because their nervous systems are so sensitive. What they need is, they need to know that we are consistent in how we approach every situation. They are hyper vigilant all the time, looking for how we're going to react. So I talk about consistency over routine. That's really, really important. So a lot of the work does have to come from us. And, we are, as adults often, and parents, quite traumatized because of what our children have been through. So we can be quite dysregulated with that. We can be quite stressed out by that. So I talk a lot about kind of getting ourselves into a place where we can be as even and calm in our temperament with our children, even when some of the stuff that they're throwing at us is extremely challenging. We have to still almost have this Zen-like calm all the time.
So, Eliza, the people who have listening have been to my workshops. I call it being a GPS. And a GPS, even if you're swearing at it or angry in the car, it just stays calm, clear, concise. Yeah. It doesn't change its tone. It doesn't react. And because our kids, they'll pick up on the slightest change in voice or the slightest change. And so for me, you have to really practice that Zen. Sometimes you need to put the sensory tool or piece of blue tack in your hand and really calm yourself. But I find if people use that calm monotone voice, and I always say, like, a GPS doesn't use the word no. And your daughter would not, she needs real choices, and she needs clear, calm consistency. And, it's funny you're saying that as a parent, people would say the child needs routine and all the rest. But when I've taught some children, I would have admin at the school telling me as a teacher, well, one of the strategies I like to give children who are PDA is a tomorrow box. So we can leave something to do tomorrow, because all of us leave stuff for tomorrow, and it just gives them out. It's like, they're not saying they're not going to do it, just we'll look at that tomorrow. And I find that just gives children a really powerful choice about, I let them choose what order they're going to do things. And if they don't want to do it today, not a problem, tomorrow box. But you'd be amazed how many people would think, as a teacher, I should be making children. So we have the same struggles.
I love that as well. And I think that's so important, always having that way out and feeling that, because again, when that child has that, when they're very, very stressed and have a kind of very small capacity for dealing with things, that is part of that building blocks for them knowing, okay, well, that's fine. We have that flexibility to move that to another day. That will immediately reduce that anxiety down immediately.
100%. And again, it's that consistency. Like, the tomorrow box is always on the desk. Some days we need it, some days we don't. But I'm guilty of that. On the weekend I was going to do things and I've moved it to tomorrow. So I feel we should give children the right to choose for tomorrow, and especially our children who are so brave just turning up at school, they need that option of, we'll leave that, because what does it matter? Yeah. Choose your battles is one of my favourite sayings.
Yeah, I think that's one of any PDA parents' favourite sayings, isn't it? Choose your battles. I think that's,
Yeah. And I often say to teachers, well, what's the educational outcome? You know, what's the goal of forcing a child to do something, breaking your relationship with them often? You know, that building a rapport with our PDA children is so important. And if you force them to do something, that they will hold on to that for a long time. Whereas if I say, that's all right, put in the tomorrow box, you know, the GPS calm, then we're building our trust in each other. And I find the children do come in and do it the next day. That's the thing people don't realize, that because these PDA children often are so anxious and want to do the right thing, that in my experience, it's very rare they put it off and off and off. They will get to it, you know.
Yeah.
I know, like, congratulations on your book. Can't not.
Thank you.
I'm very excited. And the fact it's a bestseller, Sunday Times bestseller, that's just fantastic. So now.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. I was shocked, to say the least, when that came through from my publisher, but they were very happy too. It's I think it just shows how many of us are out there, you know, and that's a really lovely thing for families to know they're not alone with this. You know, there's lots and lots of us struggling.
Yes. And I think what I loved about the book is the honesty about all the just where your daughter's meant to have fun at swimming, or she's meant to have fun, this whole concept of what fun is. And, you know, children want to go to school. And so that whole guilt, I think, comes through that many families experience. And the illustrations are amazing. So have you always been a drawer?
Yeah, always. So my dad was a political cartoonist. And so I always drew with him. You know, it was something I've always done. And it's, for me, you know, I've realized that there actually, later on in life, I've realized this, that I have my own struggles with school. I didn't always enjoy school. And so having my dad at home, so my dad was an artist, he stayed at home, and I would come home from school and I would sit with him. I mean, he's like the ultimate low demand parent, I have to say. So I would come home from school and we would just draw together. We would sit there, we would make up characters. It was a really interactive thing, and it was a really connective thing. And so I've always done it. It's always been a real comfort to me. And it's always been a really good way for me to communicate and process things. You know, I often talk about that, and I think I put it in the beginning of the book, that particularly when you're going through something very stressful, it's very difficult to process it at that time. So for me, having that was a really good way of processing my experiences, healing from those experiences. But it was also really empowering. You know, I talk about how sending angry emails didn't really work. I kind of learned that very early on. You know, the ranks close in when you send a grumpy email to a professional. But what I did learn is I could draw. You know, drawing, which has always been my outlet, was a really empowering way for me to share our experiences. And then I realized there were lots of us out there going through very similar things. So having that connection through the drawing was really good as well.
Yeah, and I love that in the book, where letting other people know they're not alone is really, really important, because I think a lot of parents feel very isolated and are really ashamed to talk about it, you know, that their children don't want to go to school. So why did you write the book? I mean, what made you then go, I want to put this as a book?
Well, it was talking to my editor, really. I was sort of, you know, it was there for quite a long time. And I think I had talked to various publishers, and they were like, I'm not sure that there's really much kind of scope for this. It's probably pretty niche. And then it was sort of working with my publisher, and obviously they could see the reach, that they were like, let's get this out there as a book, you know, let's put this together. So it was using my illustrations from Missing the Mark, which I think by the time it was published, I've got sort of 35,000 on Facebook. You know, the reach is there, as we've seen. And yeah, I think they just sort of really keen to get it out there. And then we worked together to use the quotes through the book. So the quotes are kind of tying it together, and they're just different things that I was told on our journey. And I think a lot of other families are told very sort of similar things, those sort of suggestions that are said versus the reality of what it's like was quite powerful.
Yeah, I love the, have you tried lavender oil? I've heard that one
Yeah.
many times, Eliza. I'm sure many of my listeners have heard that one too. Yeah, don't think that's going to
And
cut
again,
it.
all these things, this is the thing that, I always say, professionals are trapped by these kind of inflexible systems as parents. And, often these things are said and they are really well-meaning. I'm not there to kind of slander the, professionals, but it's just when you're absolutely on your knees often these things are said because no one knows what to say, do they? It's these awful situations where everyone's like, oh, and trying to come up with something that might help, and you're a million miles away from lavender oil at that point, but they mean
Exactly.
well.
Exactly. So what would you like people to take away from the book more than anything?
I think it's a kind of, again, we talk, I'm always talking about this sort of connection and our children needing that connection. And I think families do as well. I often say, no one told us at that time that other families went through that. Now, that would make a huge difference. We're not saying we can wave a magic wand over this, but if I had known, if those coffee mornings were saying, here's a group of other parents whose children also can't go into school, that would have given me something, and maybe the impetus to kind of start earlier about thinking about other options as well, other options for learning, because I didn't know that other families were going through this. So it made me think we have to keep trying. We have to keep trying to get her in. And that potentially, well, as we know, that was very damaging for her. So I think telling families that other families are going through that can make a big difference.
100%. And I mean, that's the advantage of both your blog and your Facebook presence and the book is I think people not knowing they're alone is so empowering in itself. So, and so where is your daughter at school at the moment? What have you ended up doing?
Well, we've done a very PDA route where we've done different things and then for about a year and then changed it up. So that's another thing I always say to families, never think you've got it sorted.
No, I always say there is no, like, I even say to teachers, like, if you have a perfect day, don't think I'll hit replay the next day. There is no replay. Like, it's just because that day was so good. We'll just replay. No, not going to happen. That's actually the worst thing you can do, to think we've got it sorted. Yeah. But for families, it'd be interesting to hear the route you've gone, because again, that can be reassuring for them about the different options. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so we did a kind of real kind of repair and restore at home for a while. So I think I've shared it quite a few times, that kind of building blocks drawing, where we started off very small, just being at home, drinking cups of tea and spending time together, and gradually seeing her being able to leave her bed. It was a very slow process to repair after that. And that's something I say to families, take that time, even if you find another environment that you think could work for them, you can blow it if you rush that process, because there aren't that many good environments for them. You don't want to lose that opportunity by rushing it. So take your time to get there. It's good to know it's there because it helps you to know there are options, but take your time. So yeah, we really, really took our time with that. And then we had tuition that came into the home, and that was very child-led, very non-worksheets, non-school like. It was very much just playing games and having a nice time. And again, that was another building block to having another adult in the home. I started to leave the home, and that was all part of that kind of pulling back and her having someone else she could trust. And then we found a really nice trauma-informed setting that was doing kind of child-led learning, no behaviour stuff, all very kind of restorative. And now we're kind of looking to change it up again, because we have a fully fledged teenager who's nearly ready for something else, but very well, not dysregulated anymore. Very much enjoying independence, going out with friends, cooking for themselves. So yeah, really kind of that, I think that sort of next step of, what's next with school, learning, college, it's a quieter voice in my head now, because we have a very well independent, happy child. So that isn't such a concern for me now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if you've ever met when Lawson, but they say they get there, they just take longer. And I just think that is, who said schooling has to be on this perfect 12, 13 years? Like sometimes people need longer than that. And particularly if you're autistic, I think respecting that you need different timeframes and different boundaries, and we don't need to rush through all of this, and
yeah. And it's hard. It still takes a lot to do that. We get these key moments through life at the minute here. All my friends and our children are going through the GCSE stage. So, it takes a lot from me to quieten that sometimes, that voice of, because we're not on that path. But, you have to remember how far you've come and how good your own progress, because like we always say, our green shoots are very different from other people. So
100%. And I just think for anyone listening, that's really reassuring, but also for educators, because not just our teachers, often in Australia, it's our teacher assistants who are working one-on-one with our PDA children and often trying to build that relationship and rapport. And that's, I'm sort of with you, like, why not take them out and we'll do some cooking or do something they enjoy? And, that aid time doesn't have to be used to do a worksheet. I mean, you can teach everything through cooking, or if the child loves gardening, or there's so many routes to learning without it having to be a worksheet and a piece of paper, which for some of our children just creates a panic attack. So
yeah, no, you're right.
So I guess I know you've done the educator's experience of PDA too with Laura. What are the takeaways in that book for teachers? If there's teachers listening, what sort of things should they keep in mind, or if they were having a child with PDA in their class?
Yeah, what I love about that book is how positive it is. And I think so often all of us feel quite negative about stuff. I've seen it. I call it the pullback. I always say to parents, look for the pullback. If you see any professional or anyone you meet and you talk about PDA or demand avoidance and they do this, because people do see it really negatively. And actually, I work with a lot of older people who have a PDA profile. I've got a PDA profile myself, who I don't see any of that. And that's the thing. Once the environment is right, you don't see this stuff that everyone kind of does focus on. Most PDA people I know are incredibly funny and energetic. It's just you've got to get that environment right. And I think that's what's lovely about the tone of Laura's book, is that it's all about that. It's all about us. We talk about kind of adaptations. We as the adult, we make all those adaptations in ourselves for these children and young people to thrive. And I think that comes across so much in her book. It's very much about meeting the child where they're at. And there's, lovely examples of Laura's work. She's worked for so long in this field. She's got some lovely examples of meeting those children where they're at and kind of taking away that hierarchy. And it's just, I just think it's such a lovely book.
Yeah. Can you give us one example of one of the ones you like? Can you think of one?
Well, I'm going to have to do Laura's favourite one, the Jabba the Hutt one. Do you remember the Jabba the Hutt poo one?
Remind me. I've forgotten. I read it ages ago.
Well, she goes in to do some tuition with a young person who's just not feeling it that day, won't engage with them at all, won't engage with Laura at all. And she goes in, the child just says, oh, what's that on your top? And she'd been making chocolate cake the other week, and she went, oh, that's just a bit Jabba the Hutt's poo. And this child just then ends up bursting in, hysterical laughter about it. And then they go off on this big chat about Jabba the Hutt and what kind of poo he has. And, But it's the way, Laura is a naturally funny person. Yeah. I know her professionally young person. But it's that, isn't it? It's just putting that in real off the cuff. Just that child's like,
100%. But I really like what you just said before. And I think the thing that frustrates me the most is that I always say it can take 6 months to see a child's sense of humour, for them to be relaxed enough in the classroom with a teacher aide. In Australia, that's what we call it. So often it'll take 6 months, but I know once I see the child's humor that we have got, like, it's so important. And often why sometimes we'd recommend a child stays with the same staff for a couple of years, because they've got to that one. I only see the child's sense of humor by term 2. I would prefer to have another 18 months with that child where we can go to those next places because we understand each other and each other's humor, and you can have those jokes and those laughs. And I'm the first to get frustrated that's not in the diagnostic criteria. I think it should be there. They have a fabulous sense of humor.
Yeah. And that's your way in, isn't it? We talk about these way-ins, and that's your way in.
Yeah, 100%. But you can't force it, because if the child's hypervigilant, they can't show their humor. And for me, once I know that anxiety's down, the humor goes up, and I get to see that fun and cheekiness, that doesn't get talked about enough. But and their passion and love for things. I mean, I always think these are the bravest kids you'll ever meet. If I had PDA, I promise you, I'd be under my doona all day. I wouldn't come.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why parents really struggle with that word resilience, isn't it? Because our children have bags of it, bags and bags.
So much. I'm with you. I mean, I honestly, I always say, put yourself in a child's shoes. If you were that overwhelmed and anxious, like, you would not get out of bed. There's no way. There's just no way. And so they are the bravest kids you'll ever meet, really. And I think, and parents, I take my hat off to you, that really, that's what's so special about your book. I think that you show that vulnerability, but you also talk about in some ways it's funny. You make it fun and accessible. And I think also the drawings, parents don't want another heavy book.
No. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? We get recommended so many good, but I mean, there's so much stuff coming out at the minute, and then you think, oh, but I've got to find time to read this. And that's, hopefully these don't take a huge chunk of time for you to read them. And also that's another great thing to share with professionals, because again, professionals get given a lot of stuff to read, but hopefully these will be a little bit easier for them to get through.
Absolutely. Now, I have to ask, why did you call your Facebook and blog Missing the Mark?
Because that's what I felt. I felt like all the kind of offers of support that we got were just missing the mark, and then also missing the attendance mark. Ours gets marked in AM, PM. That was missing. So I felt it covered quite a few areas by calling it that. So
Well, good. I wanted you to explain it so that people remember it too, so that they go and have a look. Listening to the podcast, they actually go and follow you, because I think they're going to love seeing the illustrations and your lovely insights. I feel like you're nearly a poet when I read some of them. Do you feel poetic?
Yeah, I mean, I love that kind of style of writing anyway. I love prosy kind of writing. I think it's the stripped backness, a bit like my cartoon. They're stripped back. An editor said to me years ago, she said, "You don't put a lot of detail in them, do you?" And I was thinking, no, I don't. Maybe I should try. But actually, that space is to kind of give people that space to think, and it gives it a little bit more of a whack, a bit of power to it. And I think that's the same as prosy writing. It's stark, it's pulled back. So actually, I've got a meeting with my editor next week, because we're going to try and put together some of the poetry prosy stuff that I've done.
Here's me asking if you thought of yourself as a poet.
I know. You're in the wrong profession. You should be.
we might be on other sides of the world, Eliza, but we've got each other's back there. Now, the other thing, because I think one of the things I really enjoyed reading some of your things on Missing the Mark, and I just would love teachers to hear about you as a student at school doing your doodling, because I have had a lot of students over the years who really learn best when they're allowed to sit and doodle. But can you sort of explain how that helped? I don't know if you can use words to explain how it helped you process, but for a teacher, what would you like them to know, that when you're drawing, what's going on?
It just helps me concentrate. I don't know, you might have more insight into that in a kind of more occupational therapy way, but I don't know. It's for me, it would quieten the external, I think. So for me, it kind of quietened that, which, in a classroom is, I have to say, very smelly, quite noisy. And it would allow me to sort of just keep that focus really and draw. And I have to say, that is someone who I was a grade A student at school, but really struggling. So I would also put that in there. I was the kid with they call it the spiky profile. Although Naomi Fisher I work with says who's a smooth pebble, which I think is very true. But I was a grade A student, but really struggling, probably a master we would call it now. But that was my way of managing it all, was to draw and to zone out a little bit from it all, because it's a lot being in that environment for 6 hours a day.
Absolutely. But it sounds like you were so lucky because you came home to your dad and had that outlet from that masking and that co-regulation that's so important, that just being able to sit with your dad and draw and probably have some jokes and all those things that helped you actually regulate. I can really see.
Yeah, I think and I think I don't think they probably understood a lot of it. I've got my book Thumbsucker out in November, which is about being undiagnosed autistic in my childhood. They didn't understand a lot of it. They didn't understand the meltdowns. They were quite upsetting for them, because I think they thought, well, we're doing what we can here. What's going on? They were quite confused by that. But they were very, very low demand in a lot of areas, such as my eating, which was very restricted, such as offsetting the school day by being there. I talked about it the other night about Naomi Fisher and I did a webinar on screens, and I got really into computer games for a while. And my dad, when I get home from school, be waiting there, preempting it, going, I've been waiting all day to play that game. Are you ready? Race you. And he had this he would always seemingly be really interested in what I was into at that time and just go with it. And I think without that connection, when I got home from school, I think I would have really struggled. But
So did he play the computer games with you?
Yeah.
So valuable. So it's invaluable to just. I'm happy to sit and watch my students play Fortnite or any of those things, because you actually learn a lot and you get a lot of connection. Especially, you've got a daughter coming into the teens. Most teenagers don't really want you to be there, but it's a bit like when you teach them to drive, that if they're not looking at you, that's what I find with computer games. It's not that intense looking. You're looking, the screen's like the road, you're next to each other and you're playing and engaging and meeting the child what they're interested in. I think that's invaluable.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, it's not easy communication. It's not easy to kind of express how we're feeling necessarily about things. So having that person that you do feel you've just got a really good connection with, who is going to have, fun with you. I talk to families all the time who are so tense in such a miserable place. And I say, bring some fun in, bring that playfulness back in, because that's such a good thing for everyone to have in their life when things are stressful. You're not saying the stress isn't there, but you're just having a break from it for a little bit and reminding each other of what you do have, that connection.
100%. So how do you connect with your daughter? What do you two do?
There's a lot of sitting, nearly 16-year-old, there's a lot of late night sitting on kitchen countertops. So cooking at very random late times, because having a teenager, I realise they don't actually wake up. They don't actually come into that space and start communicating till the afternoon. I've done a day's work and then suddenly, there's this teenager ready to have a big chat. So I would say it's kind of, again, that kind of having that availability. Her schedule is now very different to mine. So I love going to bed really early and getting up early. She's a night owl. So, but I have to have that availability for her. So it's often, late night countertop chats and pottering around in the kitchen. And then she gets into my bed quite a lot and we just kind of sit and she looks on her phone and shows me silly videos. And so it's having that availability and not doing the kind of, I want to go to bed. I'm there for her when she's there. So
I love it. I love it. And I think, and what you're saying though, you're meeting her with what her interests are, which are the phone and the funny videos and being available for what she's interested in, the cooking or the just hanging out in the kitchen. I love that. And I think that's the thing. There isn't one way to do it, is it? We just got to be open to it and be ready for what comes along. So, well, I really, really appreciate you sharing so much of your information with us. And I really look forward to people reading Can't Not Won't, and also joining your Missing the Mark and learning from you along the way through Facebook and your upcoming books too.
Yeah, so Thumbsuckers out in November, which is very exciting.
Fantastic. We'll have to chat again once I see that.
Yeah, we'll do that when the book comes out. Yeah,
that'll be amazing. Well, thank you again, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks a lot.
I hope you've got some great tips and strategies to make a difference. Remember, strategies wear out, and not every strategy works for everybody. If you're ready to dive in deeper to more strategies and ideas to make a difference, I'd highly recommend you consider Dr. Tony Attwood or my online courses. For more information, visit my website www.suelarkey.com.au.